that it doesn't really matter in terms of what or how much quantity of calories you take that predisposes you to develop type 2 diabetes mellitus or visceral fat obesity. It's not about the quantity of calories, but it's the quality of food.
The one people talk about most is the importance of calories. It still surprises people when I say you can lose weight quite easily without thinking about calories, and it's much more about the quality of food. And there are plenty of studies showing that calorie-controlled diets don't work for the vast majority of people.
Yes, the quality of food that matters most. I would like to help you understand that diabetes mellitus or metabolism or metabolic syndrome and visceral fat obesity can be fixed or prevented by taking care of our microbiota, the good bacteria, because there's a lot of interaction. So let's start. There are certain metabolites that are produced with certain bacteria. In this paper that I have reviewed, the gut microbiota, an important player in type 2 diabetes mellitus, and also the other paper that is both Chinese papers, but very good papers, targeting the gut microbiota and its metabolites for type 2 diabetes mellitus, this one. This has made us understand that it doesn't matter really what kind the amount of food that you eat. It's the metabolites that is produced by a certain amount of food, the certain types of food, and the interaction of the bacteria. The short-chain fatty acids. The short-chain fatty acid is produced by the fermentation of fiber, especially inulin, by bacteria, certain groups of bacteria that produces short-chain fatty acids. The short-chain fatty acid, especially the butyrate and the acetate and the propionate, is the key in terms of the health of the gut. Heard of leaky gut? That's where it starts. So what is the story about this short-chain fatty acids? When you're stressed, the leaky gut, or you're predisposed to leaky gut, sympathetic overtone predominates. And that switches also the kind of bacteria that thrives in the gut, especially in the jejunum, or the second part of the intestine. So this interaction of the fiber and the bacteria makes a big difference. Bacteria that are predominantly butyrate producing bacteria is the healthy type of bacteria. It's also the kind of food that you eat. Food rich in glucose and fructose, and also fatty food, allows proliferation of bad bacteria in such a way that this bacteria produces less butyrate, fat, red meat for example, and sugar, allows the proliferation of bad bacteria, and there's less production of butyrate. Butyrate is so important in the health of the gut. For example, when you eat a lot of sugar, when you eat a lot of red meat, and you eat a lot of fatty food, there's proliferation of bacteria that does not produce butyrate. Another metabolite that's also affected are the tryptophan. The tryptophan metabolites, or tryptophan, is an essential amino acid and can be transformed by gut microbiota into molecules such as indole and its derivatives, including indole-3 lactate and indole-3 propionic acid and indole-3 acetaldehyde. Very technical terms, but very important to understand. So what are food rich in tryptophan? Turkey, for example, poultry, cheese, to name a few. So what happens is this. In the presence of tryptophan from those sources, food sources like turkey, chicken, Clostridium, which is a type of bacteria, produces tryptamine. Now this tryptamine decreases fat accumulation, and it also decreases inflammation. So we're good here. So without Clostridium, for example, if you kill this bacteria with high sugar or antibiotics, antacids or NSAIDs, the good bacterial kingdom is compromised. Another interaction with tryptophan with a bacteria called Streptococcus genera is a formation of IPA and ILA, or the indole-3 lactate and indole-3 propionic acid, which has a good function of decreasing blood glucose, it decreases appetite, and it decreases stomach motility. It's almost similar mechanism of the GLP-1 peptide. This is the natural form of GLP-1 in the L cells of the gut, with a synthetic form of GLP-1, voila, semaglutide or Ozempic, and tirzepatide as Monjaro. This is just an example. Both decrease appetite, eat centrally. It decreases intestinal motility. That's why you feel like you're full. The satiety is always there. And it improves the insulin sensitivity. So overall, this improves metabolism. But you can harness this from the power of the microbiome called Streptococcus. Now, how do you feed this bacteria? The bacteria loves fiber, especially inulin. So when you ferment these kind of bacteria, you need inulin. So what are the sources of inulin? Number one, the Jerusalem artichoke or the sunchoke, onion, garlic, leech. So these are good source of fiber. Another source of fiber, obviously, are the vegetables, the green leafy vegetables, the cruciferous vegetables especially, broccoli, cauliflower, asparagus, kale, for example. These are friendly to the bacteria. If you don't feed the bacteria with fiber, these bacteria, especially the bacteria that does not produce butyrate, scrapes on the mucin layer of the intestine and allows the tight junction to be exposed and predisposes you to leaky gut condition. This leaky gut is not a good state because it allows entry of foreign proteins. For example, the protein from the bacteria called Yersinia, because it's not just the proteins from food that enters the gut. Yersinia, for example, has the same molecule of the thyroid, such that when your Yersinia comes interacts with the lymphocytes, the lymphocytes produce antibody to this Yersinia, and unfortunately this Yersinia has the same molecular configuration of the DNA of the thyroid. So then the antigen-antibody complex of Yersinia and the antibody travels and homes to the thyroid, and this is a state of Hashimoto's. If there's constant exposure of inflammation in the thyroid from the Hashimoto state, then you're going to develop hypothyroidism. Your metabolism goes down and you develop those conditions of visceral fat obesity and just low energy. What about trimethylamine N-oxide, or TMA, and O for oxide? Studies have shown that TMAO may contribute to the development of type 2 diabetes. So the pathway goes like this. In the presence, the TMAO develops or is produced by the interaction of food such as red meat, some fish like the white fish. In the presence of bacteria that does not produce butyrate, TMA is produced. So in the intestine, the gut microbiota break down choline, carnitine, and betaine. The betaine, you're familiar, this is an energy drink as well. And this is transformed to TMA and dimethylamine, or DMA, which are absorbed in the bloodstream and transported to the liver. In the liver, the TMA and DMA are oxidized to produce TMAO. Now this is where the problem starts, because many studies have shown that this TMA clinically is associated with inflammation and is closely associated with many cardiovascular diseases. So what happens is, in low fiber diet, in the presence of high fat and red meat, for example, the harm-associated Clostridia proliferates, TMA is produced, endotoxins are produced, there's an increase in gut permeability, or the leaky gut, and that produces chronic inflammation. The chronic inflammation produces insulin resistance, and there goes visceral fat accumulation. And there you have the setup for metabolic syndrome, which is a syndrome consisting of elevated blood sugar above 100, elevated blood pressure because the sympathetic overtone from the sugar setup is increased. You have this visceral fat that's increased. You have three factors or elements of metabolic syndrome. The healthy pathway would be that you eat fiber, especially inulin, artichoke, onions, garlic, cruciferous vegetables. The beneficial Clostridia, or the good Clostridia, and the lactobacillus produces butyrate. Now the gut barrier is strengthened. There's no leaky gut, there's healing. And then the GLP-1 is stimulated or produced from the L cells of the gut. As we talk about, the GLP-1 increases insulin, it suppresses the appetite, it delays gastric emptying, and in synthetic peptide, this is what you call the Semaglutide or Ozempic, or the Tirzepatide or the Mounjaro. So you can actually produce the effect of GLP-1 synthetic drug just by eating fiber and feeding yourself with good bacteria.
Several studies have shown, for example, this one, that if you take carbohydrates as opposed to dietary fat, then the increase in the incretins is much lower. In this study, for example, they looked at soup and they paired it either with 50 grams of carbohydrates or butter or olive oil, and they measured how high the GLP-1 spiked afterwards, and they also looked at GIP. But you can see that both types of dietary fat really raise the incretins much higher, the GLP-1.
So then GLP-1 is increased, insulin sensitivity is improved, the visceral fat is decreased. So the gut is so connected with metabolism. So you can see the correlation of the gut microbacterium and health. So how do you preserve the good bacteria and how do you aid them in terms of producing a good metabolism? Number one, hydration. In the support of the fermentation of the short-chain fatty acid from the good bacteria. If you're dehydrated, fermentation is not optimum. What about exercise? Exercise switches the sympathetic tone to parasympathetic tone, which is you're relaxing and digesting. Cortisol level goes down. There's a preponderance of butyrate producing bacteria if you exercise. The same with fasting. If you eat fiber-rich meal, there's more short-chain fatty acids. And there's another pathway for GLP-1, which decreases your appetite, increases metabolism. So there's better control of glucose and decrease in visceral fat. And that's just overnight fasting. How much more if you do fast intermittently? But be careful though, it's almost like a reset of your metabolism. Be careful though, because if you starve or prolong fasting, or if you do fasting so much, then there's preponderance of bacteria that doesn't produce butyrate. So it's harmful also for your body. So in essence, fasting and exercise are your friend. What about meditation? Especially meditation of the unconditional love of Jesus. This calms your brain. It rewires your brain. Your reaction to stress changes. Meditation calms the brain, let's put it that way. It switches the sympathetic to parasympathetic tone. So when you're in that state, when your brain is calm, the gut also is calm. The microbiome switches in population. If you meditate, there's preponderance of microbiome that produces butyrate. So when the butyrate is increased, there's healing of the gut, there's increased insulin sensitivity, there's decrease in visceral fat accumulation. At this point, I would challenge you. Why not start in your gut? Feed the good bacteria. Well, replenish first. Eat yogurt or yogurt that is high fermented with Lactobacillus gasseri or Lactobacillus rotari and many other lactobacillus, Acidophilus rhamnosus. These have been studied to help your metabolism. Hydrate well, exercise, fast, and most important thing, meditate. Meditate on the unconditional love of Jesus. Because all these things that you do, your lifestyle feeds the microbiome, and in the end, you end up with a healthy body, a well-balanced metabolism, doing away from metabolic syndrome, which is part of the type 2 diabetes, hypertension, and visceral obesity is part. If you like this video, please subscribe. Put all the notifications so that next week, we'll be giving you another video about the importance of health, especially the fusion of medicine and faith. This is Dr. Raul Enad from Cadenza Medical Clinic. Thank you for listening. Happy New Year.